They tried to bury it for 80 years, but the truth is finally coming out. Imagine a bunker deep in the frozen wastelands of Eastern Europe. It's the winter of 1943. Outside, the snow falls silently, blanketing a world at war. Inside, the screams never stop. A group of scientists huddle around a single flickering lamp. The air smells of rust, blood, and fear. The walls are lined with charts, human anatomy sketches, test notes, photographs of faces twisted in agony. They called it Project Lazarus. Officially, it didn't exist. No files, no records, not even whispers. But rumors of a resurrection experiment began spreading among soldiers on both sides. They said it was a secret Nazi program designed to create the perfect soldier, one who couldn't feel pain, hunger, or fear. But the truth was much worse. This wasn't about making men stronger. It was about seeing how far they could break the human body before it stopped being human at all. In early 1943, Germany was desperate. The Eastern Front was collapsing, millions of men were dead, and the winter was brutal. Supplies were running out, morale was crumbling. That's when a group of scientists under the SS Research Division proposed something extraordinary. They claimed they could recondition soldiers through neurological reprogramming. Using drugs, sensory deprivation, and trauma, they could erase fear and fatigue from the human mind. Their leader was a man named Dr. Wilhelm Kruger, a respected neurologist before the war. Cold, methodical, obsessed with control. Kruger once said, "The body is a machine, and any machine can be rebuilt." He convinced the Nazi high command to fund his project. Hidden under the code name Lazarus, it began as a small medical trial inside a research facility near Krakow. But soon, it grew into something monstrous. Prisoners from nearby camps were brought in, hundreds of them, men, women, and even children. They were told they'd be part of a medical study. None of them ever left. Inside the bunker, the air was thick with chemicals. There were no clocks, no sense of time. Victims were strapped to metal tables, injected with strange serums, and subjected to freezing temperatures for hours. The scientists measured everything: pulse, breathing, eye movement. They wanted to see how long the human mind could stay conscious before breaking. But then came the experiments on reanimation. They began killing subjects, then trying to bring them back. Electric shocks, adrenaline injections, cold water immersion. Nothing worked. Until one night, something did. A soldier who'd been declared dead for over 20 minutes suddenly gasped and opened his eyes. His skin was gray, his pulse weak, but he was alive. The scientists called it a miracle. But within hours, the man began screaming uncontrollably. He clawed at his own flesh. His pupils dilated until his eyes were black. Then he went silent. When guards tried to move him, he bit one of them so hard it tore through bone. They killed him again. This time they burned the body. But from that day forward, Kruger believed they were close to something extraordinary, something that could change the war forever. As the months went on, the project grew. More funding, more prisoners, and fewer limits. Doctors were given permission to use any methods necessary to test human endurance. Some were forced to stay awake for 15 days straight. Others were frozen alive to study hypothermia. The scientists called them subjects. The soldiers called them ghosts. Reports say the bunker was nicknamed the Factory of Silence, because once someone entered, they were never heard from again. But the most disturbing part? Allied intelligence actually found traces of Lazarus years before the end of the war. Small, intercepted reports, references to psychological weapon trials. Yet no one acted. They thought it was just Nazi propaganda. Until 1944, and when the entire facility went dark. In February 1944, all transmissions from the bunker suddenly stopped. No radio, no couriers, nothing. At first, the SS assumed the Soviets had overrun it. But when they sent a reconnaissance team, what they found terrified even them. The outer gates were destroyed from the inside. Blood trails led into the snow. The power generators were running. but the lights inside flickered on and off, and the scientists, gone. All they found were rows of test chambers, shattered glass, and bodies, frozen, contorted, and arranged in a circle around a central operating table. In the middle lay Dr. Kruger's notebook, open to a single phrase written in red ink. They woke up. The SS ordered the entire site sealed. They destroyed the upper levels with explosives and burned every document they could find. But as the war ended, Allied forces discovered an underground section they had missed. It was buried beneath tons of concrete, with airtight doors and a ventilation system still running. Inside were hundreds of preserved bodies, frozen, perfectly intact, eyes open. Some looked as if they were still breathing. The U.S. intelligence officers who entered that site wrote in their report that the temperature inside was unnaturally low. One soldier described it as walking into a freezer full of people who were trying to scream. Those documents were classified under Operation Paperclip, the same operation that secretly brought Nazi scientists to work for the U.S. government. And that's where the trail goes cold. For decades, the story of Project Lazarus was buried under layers of censorship and denial. But a few fragments survived, passed down through whispers, through families of the soldiers who were there. And those fragments tell us that what happened in that bunker wasn't just an experiment. It was a nightmare that refused to die. The snow outside never melted, even now. Survivors who live near that forest swear the ground there still feels colder than anywhere else in Poland. They remember the soldiers who came at night, trucks with no markings, the smell of diesel and metal, and the way dogs refused to go near the fence line. When the war ended, locals thought that nightmare was over. But they were wrong, because Lazarus didn't die with Germany. It simply changed hands. In 1945, the Allies were desperate to collect every shred of German science before the Soviets could. Operation Paperclip brought hundreds of Nazi scientists to the United States, promising them new identities and clean records. Among them was Dr. Erich Vogel, a quiet biochemist from Kruger's team. On paper, Vogel worked on fatigue resistance research. In truth, he was the man who mixed the Lazarus serum, the chemical that was supposed to restart the human heart. Documents from 1947 show Vogel working in a U.S. Army lab in Maryland. The project name Sub-Zero Physiology Unit 7, different name, same purpose. Vogel told his superiors he could create soldiers who could fight in extreme cold without rest. What he didn't mention was how he planned to test them. Within months, strange reports surfaced from nearby hospitals, men suffering frostbite in midsummer, patients claiming they'd been injected with clear liquid that burned like ice. Most were written off as delusional veterans. In 1948, Vogel's research reached a breaking point. He'd been studying a chemical mixture of adrenaline, cortisol, and something still unknown, a compound recovered from the original Lazarus bunker. He called it Compound X23. The formula was destroyed years later, but surviving notes say it altered blood viscosity, letting cells survive longer without oxygen. On paper, that sounds like a medical miracle. In reality, it created something worse than death. Test animals injected with X23 stayed alive for hours after brain death. Their hearts kept beating, their bodies kept moving, twitching long after consciousness was gone. Vogel claimed it was proof the serum worked. The U.S. Army quietly funded him for 2 more years. Then in 1950, his entire facility burned to the ground. The fire report said chemical accident. But the first firefighters on scene described rows of tanks filled with moving shadows. Every survivor was reassigned. Vogel disappeared. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, the Soviets weren't blind. They found remnants of Kruger's notes in 1945 and started their own version, Project MIR-12, hidden deep in Siberia. Defectors later said MIR-12 focused on using extreme cold to manipulate human metabolism. They experimented on prisoners, political dissidents, anyone they could get. Their goal was immortality through suspended animation. By 1953, Soviet scientists reported partial success. Subjects could be placed into a frozen state for weeks and revived. But when Revived, they were different. One doctor described them as awake but empty. Their pupils didn't react to light. Their skin temperature stayed below normal even after hours in warmth. And then, every single revived subject died within a month. Autopsies showed rapid tissue decay, as if their bodies had aged 50 years in days. The project was quietly shut down after Stalin's death. Decades later, in 1967, a freight train left Warsaw under military escort. Officially, it carried industrial refrigeration units bound for East Germany. It never arrived. Locals reported lights flickering in the forest along the tracks. A week later, soldiers found the train derailed in the mountains, every car sealed from the inside. When they forced the doors open, they found ice on the walls. No refrigeration system could explain the temperature. Inside, they found 32 bodies. Most were wearing lab coats, some had bullet holes, a few had handwritten notes pinned to their chests, numbers, formulas, fragments of the same Lazarus symbol once seen in Kruger's notebook. All evidence was confiscated by the East German Ministry of State Security. The event never appeared in official records, but railway workers who witnessed it still talk about the noise they heard before dawn that morning. A low hum, like a heartbeat echoing through steel. Fast forward to 1981. A journalist named Anya Reinhardt was investigating Cold War medical crimes when she stumbled upon a stack of Soviet microfilms in Berlin. They were labeled only L archives. Inside, medical photos, typed reports, and one chilling image. A man on an operating table, eyes open, covered in frost, veins glowing dark blue. Anya tried to publish her findings, but within weeks her apartment was broken into, and the films disappeared. The only thing left was a note on her typewriter. It sleeps where it began. She vanished 2 years later. In 1999, construction crews near Krakow unearthed a sealed tunnel system. The Polish government claimed it was a forgotten munitions depot, but leaked photos showed surgical equipment and glass capsules frozen solid, still bearing the code LZR-43. Samples were taken to a military lab. Weeks later, the lab was quarantined. Officials said chemical contamination. Scientists who handled the samples reported hallucinations, sudden drops in body temperature, and nightmares of being underwater. 2 of them quit science altogether. One of them wrote anonymously online years later. We thought we found chemicals, we found something alive. The real victims of Project Lazarus weren't just the test subjects. They were the families who never got answers. Records show hundreds of missing persons during 1943-1944 near the Krakow region. Farmers, villagers, prisoners from smaller camps, all gone without trace. The few who returned were never the same. One woman, Katarina Novak, was found wandering the woods in 1946. Her hair had turned white, she couldn't speak. Every night she drew circles in the dirt and whispered numbers. When she died in 1951, doctors found frost inside her lungs. To this day, her descendants keep her journal locked away. It contains pages of mirrored writing like someone recording a dream backward. One phrase repeats over and over. They are still cold. In 2011, declassified CIA documents revealed that during the 1950s, several human endurance experiments were conducted using captured Nazi research. One folder references the Lazarus method. It describes an attempt to use induced hypothermia to extend astronaut survival in low oxygen conditions. The project was terminated after 3 volunteers suffered cardiac arrest and were revived, but each claimed they saw frozen figures watching them. Medical staff called it hallucination, but all 3 described the same image, a man in a lab coat smiling with black eyes. In 2020, a team of urban explorers entered what they believed was the ruins of the original Lazarus site. They live-streamed everything. For the first hour, it was just debris, rusted doors, collapsed tunnels. Then, around the 90-minute mark, one of them found a lower chamber sealed with a steel hatch. They pried it open. Inside was a single operating table still bolted to the floor. Next to it lay a notebook, soaked but legible. On the last page, the same words written in red ink. They woke up. Moments later, their feed cut out. The footage reappeared online 2 days later on obscure forums, heavily glitched. Authorities denied any knowledge, but locals say after that night, strange noises came from the forest again. That low hum, like a heartbeat through the ground. Look back through history and you'll see the pattern. Every time someone gets close to Lazarus, something silences them. Files vanish. Labs burn. Witnesses disappear. It's almost as if the project never wanted to die. As if whatever they awakened in that bunker refuses to stay buried. And maybe that's the real secret. Not a serum, not a weapon. But something else entirely. Something human beings were never meant to wake up. The year is 1944. Deep beneath the snow, the bunker that once hummed with machines has turned quiet. But silence isn't peace. It's the kind that comes before something breaks. For months, the scientists inside Project Lazarus hadn't seen sunlight. Their food shipments stopped. No one from command answered the radio. Some of them believed the war was lost. Others believed they were close to changing humanity forever. Dr. Kruger's face had become gaunt. He hadn't slept in days. The serum, his life's work, had begun to change. Every new batch behaved differently, sometimes thick like oil, sometimes crystal clear, sometimes pulsing faintly under the light. It was as if the formula was alive. One night, his assistant, Elsa Brandt, logged an experiment that should have ended the project for good. Subject 47, a young prisoner, had been injected with the latest strain of compound X23. At first, nothing happened. Then the heart monitor spiked. The man's body convulsed, his temperature dropped below freezing, and his eyes opened, bright white, no pupils. He sat up, silent, as frost crawled down the metal table. The guards panicked. Kruger shouted for everyone to stay calm, to record everything. But when Subject 47 turned his head, every bulb in the room burst. Moments later, power failed across the entire bunker. When the lights came back, Subject 47 was gone. Only his restraints remained, bent open, metal torn like paper. From that moment, nothing inside the facility worked properly. Electrical systems flickered, ventilation froze, and one by one the staff began to vanish. Elsa's final diary entry is dated March the 2nd, 1944. Something is in the lower corridor. We hear it moving between the walls. Kruger says it's a survivor. I don't think so. By the end of that week, only 11 people were left alive. They sealed themselves in the control room, rationing what food remained. Some swore they could hear breathing through the pipes. Others claimed they saw shapes in the frost on the glass, faces pressing out from inside the walls. Kruger refused to abandon his work. He believed the serum had created a new state of life, something between freezing and death. He called it the threshold. He wrote that they had not failed. They had succeeded too well. Whatever they woke up could survive anything, even time itself. On March 14th, and thus 1944, the bunker sent one final radio message. It was intercepted by a German listening post and later recovered by Allied intelligence. The tape lasted only 14 seconds. This is Kruger. We've seen the other side. God forgive us. They are... The rest was static. Hours later, the station monitoring that signal recorded a surge in atmospheric electricity over the region, like a lightning strike that never ended. Then silence. When an SS cleanup team arrived days later, they found the outer door half melted, as if exposed to extreme cold from within. Every light was shattered. Inside, the walls glittered with frost, and every metal surface was covered in handprints. In the center of the main lab sat Kruger's recorder. The tape inside had frozen solid. Etched into the floor were the words, "They woke up." The Nazi command ordered the entire site destroyed. Explosives were planted, and the area was declared chemically contaminated. But explosions only sealed the upper levels, not the deep core where the experiments happened. Rumors spread among soldiers stationed nearby. At night they heard knocking under the ground. Some said it sounded like people trapped below. Others said it was something else trying to get out. In 1945, Soviet troops swept through the region. They found nothing but ash and ice. Yet one officer, Lieutenant Alexei Morozov, wrote in his private notes that he found a tunnel with air warm like breath and left immediately. His entire squad was reassigned the next day. That report never reached Moscow. After the war, the world wanted to forget. New governments rose, cities were rebuilt, but below the surface the past was still breathing. The United Nations was formed. The Nuremberg trials made history, but not every crime saw daylight. When Allied forces raided secret research archives, they found boxes of documents marked with one symbol, a circle split by a vertical line, the Lazarus mark. Every country wanted it. American agents took some. Soviet officers stole others. What couldn't be claimed was burned, but a few folders vanished before anyone could destroy them. One ended up in the hands of a British intelligence officer named Henry Talbot. He'd been part of the task force cataloging Nazi science projects. When he stumbled across the Lazarus files, he was told to classify them as non-medical experiments, but curiosity killed his career. Talbot copied the files and smuggled them out of Germany, hoping to expose what he called the most inhuman act of the war. He never did. In 1948, his car was found at the bottom of the Rhine. Inside, one briefcase empty except for a single page. They woke up. By the 1950s, several former Lazarus scientists had resurfaced under new names. Some worked for American labs, others disappeared into Soviet programs. But one name stood out, Elsa Brandt, the only known survivor of the original team. In 1956, she was spotted living under a false identity in Buenos Aires. A local journalist approached her for an interview. She refused to speak. All she said was, "It wasn't the cold that killed them, it was what they brought back." 3 weeks later, she was dead. Caused hypothermia in a city where it never snows. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, a facility in Alaska, officially for climate endurance training, had begun testing cold resistance drugs. Declassified memos show that these experiments were based on formulas matching Kruger's notes. One report dated February 9th, 1959 describes a test subject whose core temperature dropped to 19 degrees Celsius. He should have died instantly. Instead, he whispered, "It's warm down there." Then his heart stopped. The scientists revived him 12 minutes later, perfectly stable. For 6 hours, he was responsive, alert, even joking. Then he started to bleed from his eyes, and when they sedated him, his pulse didn't slow. It multiplied. The project was terminated that night. The lab burned 2 weeks later. Cause: electrical malfunction. For decades, Lazarus stayed silent again. No records, no survivors, no proof. Just whispers. But in 1972, a man named Dr. Martin Heller, a German-born physicist working for NATO, sent a letter to his colleague. He wrote that he had seen something strange during a classified inspection in Poland, a vault filled with ice that never melted. He ended the letter with one line, "If anyone finds this, don't open the door. They're still in there." He vanished 3 days later while flying from Warsaw to London. His plane was never found. By the late 20th century, Project Lazarus had become a myth among soldiers and historians. A ghost story told to new recruits. A warning about the cost of curiosity. But those who looked closer found that the myth had roots in documents, in unmarked graves, in restricted archives, and all of them pointed to the same coordinates in southern Poland. Even satellite imagery showed something odd. A patch of land where snow never fully melts, even in summer, where the ground temperature stays several degrees below the surrounding forest. Locals call it the cold ground. They say at night you can still hear voices beneath it, whispering like air escaping from the earth. The cold ground never thawed. By the late 1980s, satellite photos still showed a strange square of frozen earth in southern Poland, perfectly geometric, a place where snow refused to melt even in August. To the locals, it was a curse. To a small team of scientists from Warsaw University, it was an invitation. They called their survey Operation Janus. Officially, they were studying subsurface magnetic fields. Unofficially, they wanted to find the Lazarus bunker. They brought radar equipment, geothermal scanners, and a generator truck. For 2 days, nothing. Then their meters spiked, a pulse coming from 40 meters below ground every 20 seconds, steady as a heartbeat. That night, the team's recordings captured a sound beneath the wind, a faint metallic knock, 3 taps, pause, 3 more. The same pattern Kruger had used to signal his lab assistants in 1944. At dawn, the lead engineer refused to continue. He said the ground felt alive. They packed up and left. 2 weeks later, the government sealed the area and classified everything. In 1993, one of the Janus technicians sold a copy of their field audio to a German documentarian. When played through a spectrogram, the knocking formed a pattern matching human speech frequencies, as if something below was mimicking voices. Experts called it an artifact of wind and echo, but the pattern was too regular, too intentional. The reel was labeled Lazarus Heartbeat and locked away in a private archive. Years later, a digital copy surfaced online. Viewers noticed a whisper buried in the noise at the 6-minute mark. We never died. In 2004, a construction crew digging a pipeline near Olkus hit a sealed steel door under the soil. Behind it was a small room containing a single metal chair and a man's body sitting upright covered in ice. His ID tag read Vogel. Forensics dated the corpse to the 1940s, but the flesh was untouched by decay. DNA tests were inconclusive because the cells refused to break down under heat. When researchers attempted a sample, the skin crystallized and shattered like glass. The body was taken to a secure facility in Warsaw. Within a month, that facility suffered a power failure and flood. All archives were lost. Only one technician spoke afterward. He claimed that when the freezers failed, the room filled with a smell like metal and snow, and he heard footsteps on the tile, though he was alone. A former CIA analyst named Daniel Meyer later admitted that Lazarus was referenced in American files as cryobiologic persistence. He said the agency kept a sample of X-23 until the late 1970s and destroyed it after 2 researchers suffered sudden frostbite in a room above 25 degrees Celsius. When asked if he believed it was still active, Meyer answered, "You can't kill what was never alive to begin with." He died in a house fire 3 weeks later. By the turn of the millennium, Project Lazarus was half legend, half forbidden science. Documentaries touched it and backed away. Governments refused comment, yet the pattern never stopped. Every 20 years, something stirred beneath the cold ground. And in 2020, that pattern surged again. A seismic sensor near Krakow recorded pulses identical to human heart rhythms coming from 38 meters below the surface. Each pulse was stronger than the last. Locals reported hearing a low hum under their houses, and animals refused to cross the fields. Then came the storm, one that formed out of clear skies, rained for 6 minutes, and froze everything in a circle 1 kilometer wide. Meteorologists called it a thermal anomaly, but the shape of the frozen ring matched the blueprint of the Lazarus bunker exactly. When the storm cleared, the forest was silent. Drone footage from that night showed the trees bowing inward, all tilted toward a single point at the center of the frozen circle. At dawn, the snow glowed faintly blue. Police blocked the road, claiming power line damage, but a local journalist slipped past the checkpoint. His footage shows a crater lined with frost and a single iron hatch, half open. Steam rose from within. The video ends with his voice saying, "There's someone down there." He never uploaded the rest. 2 days later, his phone was found inside a snow-filled ditch 5 miles away, battery still warm. Weeks after, a 43-second clip appeared on anonymous forums, the same crater filmed from closer. A figure stands in the mist, tall, motionless, wrapped in what looks like a lab coat. The camera trembles. A whisper. "Dr. Kruger?" Then static in a final frame. A close-up of the figure's face. Eyes black, skin like cracked ice. Mouth frozen open in a half-smile. Analysts tried to trace the file. Metadata. Showed it was recorded with equipment manufactured in 1943. The Polish Interior Ministry issued a single press release. No evidence of hazardous material was found, but local hospitals quietly reported a surge of frostbite cases, victims claiming they felt cold from the inside out. Weather stations recorded temperature drops every midnight for a week, always at the same minute. 0:14 a.m. Then, without warning, the readings stopped. Satellite images of the region were blurred for 6 months on every public mapping site. In 2021, archaeologists cataloging artifacts from World War II found a steel tag in a warehouse near Munich. On it, the Lazarus symbol, the split circle, freshly etched, no rust, no wear. Tests confirmed the metal was 1940s steel, but the engraving was less than a month old. When the curator sealed it for storage, the temperature inside the container dropped 10 degrees in under a minute. Security cameras captured frost forming along the floor in a straight line leading to the exit door. They shut the museum the next morning. On March 14, 2022, exactly 78 years after Kruger's last broadcast, a shortwave radio enthusiast in Sweden recorded an unknown signal on an unused military frequency, 14 seconds long, the same as the original Lazarus transmission. A man's voice, distant, cracked, speaking German. "We are cold, but we are awake." Then the faint sound of breathing and silence. Engineers verified it wasn't interference. The modulation matched equipment from the 1940s. The tape leaked online, then vanished within hours. Accounts sharing it were deleted, entire channels wiped. What was Project Lazarus really? A desperate experiment, a weapon, a myth that fed on fear, or proof that human beings crossed a line nature never intended. Every government touched it, every power buried it, and yet it still finds a way to breathe through the cracks of history. Maybe the cold isn't outside. Maybe it's waiting in us. In the part of the human mind that wanted to outlive death itself. Because if the stories are true, the last thing Dr. Kruger wrote before the lights went out wasn't just, "They woke up." The full sentence, scrawled beneath in trembling red ink, read, "They woke up and we followed." The world moved on. Technology advanced, empires fell, and history books filled their pages with victories and heroes. But there's one thing history never talks about. The parts that were cut out on purpose. When the Cold War ended, thousands of secret archives were open to the public. Yet the Lazarus files stayed classified, every version redacted, every witness dead. Governments claimed they were destroyed in a fire, but declassified budgets from the late 90s show millions spent on cryogenic security containment in Poland. So what were they still containing? In 2007, an independent journalist named Ewa Kowalska found evidence of a government facility under Lake Charnavik. She managed to sneak inside through a drainage tunnel and filmed something incredible. Rows of cylindrical pods frozen under layers of ice, humming quietly. Each pod carried a serial number beginning with LZR. She uploaded 10 seconds of footage before her account vanished. The next morning, police found her car submerged in the same lake. Inside was a waterproof bag containing her camera, battery dead, but the screen still displaying one frame. A hand pressed against glass, fingertips blackened with frost. After Ewa's death, Poland's defense ministry ordered new fences around the area. All digital maps were blurred again. No further mentions of LZR appeared anywhere until 2014, when a group of NATO scientists requested samples from legacy cryogenic research. Those samples never reached the lab. The courier's truck was discovered 50 kilometers from its route, doors open, cargo hold empty, snow inside the cabin, though the air temperature was 20 degrees. No footprints, no sign of struggle, only a single note taped to the dashboard, written in shaky handwriting. "We woke it again." By now, the Lazarus story had spread across forums, podcasts, and conspiracy threads. Most dismissed it as Cold War paranoia, but in 2017, a retired intelligence officer anonymously released a document titled LZR Containment Protocol. It described a biological anomaly recovered from a sealed bunker near Krakow, a substance capable of maintaining neural activity below freezing. It warned that exposure could cause psychogenic resonance. Victims experienced auditory hallucinations resembling voices of the dead. The document ends with one line: "If containment fails, reduce temperature and pray." The account that posted it disappeared within an hour. Every re-upload was hit by automated takedowns labeled medical privacy violation. Yet fragments survived, enough to prove that at least one government had been keeping something on ice. Literally. In 2020, during pandemic lockdowns, a retired Polish engineer contacted an online history channel. He claimed he had worked maintenance at a remote facility that hummed even when the power was off. He described underground rooms lined with frost and cables running into sealed pits. When asked what was inside the pits, he said, "Not bodies." Not exactly. He refused to elaborate, but added one final sentence before hanging up: "It moves slower than death." The call traced back to a number disconnected for 10 years. Every nation that touched Lazarus buried their involvement. But the data they gathered bled into medicine, cryogenics, and neuroscience, modern cooling systems for transplant organs. The formulas trace back to 1943. Spaceflight hibernation trials, same foundation. Pieces of the secret survived under different names, and no one asked where they came from. Maybe that's why governments never truly wanted the truth out, because the line between horror and progress is thin, and Lazarus sits right in the middle of it. In 2023, an international research team quietly drilled near the cold ground, using seismic sensors to study permafrost melt. At 03:17 a.m., their instruments recorded a pulse from exactly 40 meters below, identical to a human heartbeat. Then a second pulse, stronger, synchronized to the first. 2 beats. When the team packed their equipment, one researcher noticed frost forming on his gloves, though the air was warm. He joked, "It's saying goodbye." 2 days later, he collapsed with hypothermia symptoms in his apartment. His last recorded words, "It's not gone. It's under us." 6 months later, a hacker collective released a 3 gigabyte folder named LZR Truth. Inside were coordinates, lab memos, and audio logs. One file contained a recording labeled Kruger Reactivation Test. It begins with static, then a man whispering in German. Subject 1 responds. A low moan follows, like wind through metal. Then softly a second voice. "Doctor?" Analysts confirmed the sound pattern wasn't a loop or edit. It contained the exact imperfections of a voice traveling through frozen air. Within 48 hours, the folder vanished from the web, and the group's accounts were erased. But the audio remains, copied endlessly by people who don't even believe in it. Yet keep listening. Some historians now think Lazarus wasn't just a failed Nazi project. They believe it began as a search for suspended consciousness, to keep pilots awake longer, to push soldiers past exhaustion. The serum didn't just slow death. It split the human body from the human mind. What woke up in those chambers might still be echoing. A collective memory frozen in chemical form. Maybe that's why witnesses describe hearing voices. Maybe it's not ghosts at all, but the minds of the people who never thawed, replaying the last seconds of their lives again and again. Today, the site of the Lazarus bunker is fenced off by the Polish military. Thermal cameras still show fluctuations at night, shapes moving where no living creature could survive. Locals hang crucifixes along the fence and leave candles during winter. They say on cold nights you can hear tapping under the ground, like someone politely asking to be let out. Maybe it's just the ice cracking. Maybe it's something else. What began as a desperate war experiment has turned into the longest silence in history. A secret so heavy it froze time itself, And perhaps that's why it was erased, not to protect the guilty, but to protect everyone else from what they made, because some things, once woken, never sleep again.